Imagine a peaceful evening at home, when a simple walk through your own property turns into a nightmare. That's exactly what happened when a group of racist cops decided to accuse a black man of infiltrating his own land. But what they didn't know, he wasn't just any man. He was the FBI director, a battle-tested professional who wouldn't let anyone, not even law enforcement, push him around. Before we dive into this intense story, tell me, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments below, and make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more shocking stories like this one. It was a quiet evening in the suburban neighborhood of Crestwood. The golden hues of sunset lingered on the horizon, casting a warm glow over the rows of pristine homes. In one of these homes stood Jonathan Blackwell, a 40-year-old black man with a strong athletic build and a well-groomed demeanor. He was home from his long day at the FBI headquarters, ready for some much-needed peace and solitude. The Blackwell family had lived in Crestwood for over a decade. Jonathan had worked hard for everything he had: his career, his home, his family. He'd climbed the ranks in the FBI with precision, earning respect from colleagues and enemies alike. However, tonight, the world he had carefully built was about to be shattered in a way he could never have imagined. Jonathan had just stepped outside to check on the new security system he had installed. As he walked around his property, running his hands along the fresh, polished features of the gates and fences, a car approached, a patrol car. Slowly, almost as if it was deliberately driving at a pace meant to intimidate. Jonathan stopped and watched the vehicle pull into his driveway. Two officers, both white, stepped out. They were from the local precinct, Crestwood's finest. Their uniforms were crisp and their badges gleamed in the fading light. One officer, a younger man with a sharp jawline and an attitude that reeked of arrogance, walked toward Jonathan with purpose. The other, older and with a graying beard, stayed by the car, his eyes suspiciously scanning the surroundings. "Good evening, officer," Jonathan said, his tone even, but his senses were alert. "Evening, sir," the younger officer replied. His eyes narrowed as he surveyed Jonathan's property. "You live here?" Jonathan raised an eyebrow. "I do. This is my property." The officer's lips curled into a small, condescending smile. "Interesting. You sure about that?" Jonathan felt his pulse quicken slightly, but he maintained his composure. "I'm very sure. We've had reports of someone infiltrating this neighborhood," the officer continued, ignoring Jonathan's calm tone. "We need to make sure you're not up to anything." Jonathan's heart skipped a beat. He'd dealt with racial profiling before, but never in his own home. "What exactly do you mean by infiltrating? This is my house. You have no right to question me." The officer's demeanor shifted immediately. "Oh, we've seen your type before. You sure you're not just playing the role of a respectable man in a nice neighborhood? There's a history here with your kind." The words hit Jonathan like a slap to the face. His stomach tightened, and his mind raced with the reality of what was happening. This wasn't a simple misunderstanding. This was deliberate racial targeting. The officer didn't even know who he was. "My type?" Jonathan repeated slowly. "And what exactly does that mean?" "You know," the officer said, a slight smirk on his face, "you've got no right to be here. This neighborhood wasn't built for people like you." Jonathan's face remained impassive, but inside, a storm was brewing. He knew he had to keep calm. These officers didn't know who they were dealing with. He wasn't just any black man in this neighborhood. He was Jonathan Blackwell, the director of the FBI. He'd been to war against far worse than ignorance. But now it seemed his greatest challenge was going to come from the very people who were supposed to serve and protect. "I've lived here for over a decade," Jonathan replied steadily, "and if you think you can come onto my property and accuse me of something without any reason, then you're mistaken." The younger officer stepped forward, puffing his chest as if he was ready to escalate things. "We'll see about that," he said, taking a step toward Jonathan. "Show us some ID." Jonathan's eyes narrowed. "You've got no probable cause. I'm not showing you anything." "Then we'll take you in for questioning," the officer said, his hand now resting on his taser. "This is a criminal investigation. You're not above the law." Jonathan stood his ground, his eyes sharp and calculating. He had to play this smart. He wasn't in a position to escalate a confrontation, not when the stakes were so high. "You need to leave now," he said calmly, "before you make a bigger mistake than you already have." The officer laughed. "A mistake? We've been watching you for weeks. You've been under surveillance." Jonathan's heart raced for a brief moment. This was getting dangerous. "I'm not going anywhere until I get an apology from both of you," he said. "This isn't just some petty accusation. You're violating my rights." The older officer, who had been quiet until now, finally spoke up. His voice was gruff but surprisingly calm. "Maybe we should back off for a minute, Mason. He's right. There's no reason to be here. We don't have any evidence. Mason, the younger officer, shot him a frustrated look. We've been tracking this guy for months. I know something's off. I'm telling you, Mason, leave it alone. The older officer insisted. Jonathan knew it was time to end this. He wasn't going to let these two men think they could treat him like this, not in front of his own property. He stepped back, motioning toward the front door. Get off my land, Jonathan said, his voice firm. Before I file a lawsuit, you don't want to test me. The younger officer hesitated, eyes flashing with anger, but the older officer placed a hand on his arm, signaling him to retreat. With a final glare, Mason turned and stomped toward the patrol car. As they left, Jonathan couldn't help but feel a strange calm wash over him. He had to hold on to this moment, but deep inside, he knew that this was only the beginning. He had let them go, but they had no idea who he was, and when they found out, when they learned that they had just targeted the wrong man, that was when things would really get interesting. The next morning, the storm inside Jonathan's mind had not passed. His mind raced with the possibility of the cop's threat becoming a reality. He sat at his desk, a mountain of paperwork spread in front of him, but his thoughts were elsewhere. The problem with being an FBI director, especially one who had fought for justice his entire career, was that it was hard to let go of something this personal. He checked his watch, another hour to go before the daily briefing with his team, but he was restless. The day before, the encounter with the two cops had been unsettling, but more than that, it was a wake-up call. His mind wasn't just consumed with how to deal with Mason and the other officer. He was focused on the bigger picture. The attack wasn't random. The racial profiling wasn't a mistake. The system was broken, and now, it seemed, the cracks were starting to show. His phone buzzed on the table. Director Blackwell. The voice on the other end of the line said, calm and professional. I'm calling to confirm you've seen the footage we pulled from the incident yesterday. You need to get to the office immediately. Jonathan's hand clenched around the phone. What footage? The body cam footage from Mason and his partner. We've already reviewed it. This doesn't look like a misunderstanding anymore. It's bigger. A chill ran down Jonathan's spine. His first instinct was to tell them to hold off, but the urgency in the agent's voice told him this wasn't just a routine procedure. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Jonathan arrived at the office in record time, his sleek black car speeding through the city streets. As he entered the building, he was greeted by his personal security team, who were all visibly on edge. They had already been briefed on his encounter with the two officers, and now it was clear that things were escalating rapidly. Inside the operations room, Agent Simmons, a senior member of his team, was already at the large screen with the body cam footage queued up. The agents surrounding the room looked like they had just witnessed a car crash. Play it, Jonathan ordered, his voice low and authoritative. The footage flickered on the screen. Jonathan's heart rate quickened as he saw the same body cam footage that had been filmed the day before, the one Mason had hoped would be deleted. The video showed Mason approaching Jonathan's home, the tension in his body language clear. Then the moment when he accused Jonathan of infiltrating his own property. But that wasn't the most chilling part. What followed was the officer's smug expression, his attempt to instigate the situation further, egging Jonathan into a confrontation. The body cam audio was crystal clear, and Jonathan's suspicion was confirmed. Mason had been baiting him, looking for a reason to escalate. But then the most damning part of the video surfaced. The officer's comment about Jonathan not belonging here was unmistakable. That's it, Jonathan muttered. They knew exactly who I was. Simmons stopped the video. Director Blackwell, we've traced the call records. Mason's behavior isn't just isolated. We've connected him to multiple similar reports across this precinct. Minorities targeted without cause. Escalation where there was no need. This is systemic. Jonathan's jaw clenched. I knew it, but we need more. I want the names, the dates, everything. I've already started pulling the records, Simmons confirmed, tapping away at the computer. We have enough evidence here to tie this into a much bigger corruption case. It could go all the way to the top. Jonathan nodded, his mind working quickly. This was no longer just about him or his own rights. This was a problem that threatened the integrity of the system he had spent his life protecting. Get the word out. We're going public with this, Jonathan said, his voice firm. But we need to be strategic. I want every officer's name tied to these cases, every single one. As the hours passed, the investigation took on a new level of urgency. Jonathan, despite the pressure, remained calm. This was his wheelhouse, handling crises, exposing corruption, protecting the innocent. He couldn't afford to falter now. But just as he was getting a handle on things, another message arrived, this time from an anonymous source. You've been targeted, Director Blackwell. Be careful. Someone inside the FBI is covering for Mason. You're not as safe as you think. Jonathan's eyes flickered to the screen, where the message sat. The weight of it hit him harder than any confrontation. He was already fighting an external enemy, but now it seemed there was someone within the very system he had worked to build, someone trying to bury the truth. Simmons walked over, noticing the look on Jonathan's face. "What is it, sir?" Jonathan didn't respond immediately. His mind was whirring. Who in the FBI would want to protect someone like Mason, and why? "Get me surveillance footage from the precinct," he said, his voice low, "and send a team to Mason's last known location. If there's someone covering for him, we need to find out who." Simmons nodded and left the room. Jonathan was left alone with his thoughts. He knew the road ahead was going to be long and dangerous. The system he had trusted was broken, but one thing was certain. He wouldn't stop. He couldn't. His father had taught him that you don't stop fighting for what's right. And Jonathan wasn't about to start now. As the hours passed, Jonathan's determination only grew stronger. He had become the focal point of a storm that was bigger than he could have imagined. The quiet suburban neighborhood of Crestwood had never felt more hostile. His mind raced with strategies, knowing that what he was about to do would ripple far beyond the prison walls and small-town police precincts. The clock on the wall ticked relentlessly, marking the passage of time. But Jonathan wasn't just dealing with a few rogue officers anymore. This was a conspiracy. The phone buzzed in his hand. It was Simmons. "Sir, we've got the footage from the precinct," Simmons said, his voice tight. "And it's worse than we thought. Mason wasn't just operating on his own. We've found evidence that links him to a network of officers involved in illegal activities, blackmail, bribery, and worse. These officers were supposed to be investigating criminal organizations, but they were running their own." Jonathan's pulse quickened. "How deep does it go?" Simmons hesitated. "We're still tracking the connections, but we've identified at least 5 officers directly tied to Mason. They've been working together for years, covering each other's tracks. It's a dirty operation." Jonathan sat back, his mind churning. He had known that there were problems within the system, but this was something far more insidious. He needed to act fast. The plan was set into motion that night. Jonathan stood in front of his team, an unspoken urgency in the air. Everyone knew what was at stake. This wasn't just a fight for justice. This was about dismantling a criminal network that had taken root within the very institution that was supposed to protect the people. "We move tomorrow," Jonathan said firmly. "This can't wait. We have enough evidence to take them down, but we need to move fast. If we hesitate, we risk losing everything." The team nodded, their faces set with resolve. They had always known Jonathan as a calm, calculating leader, but tonight, they saw the fire in his eyes. This wasn't just about justice anymore. This was personal. They spent the rest of the night organizing their operation. The first wave would be directed at the precinct itself. Simmons and a small team would infiltrate the evidence room and seize all the files that tied the corrupt officers to Mason. Meanwhile, Jonathan would confront Mason head-on, taking him down before he could flee or destroy any evidence. As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, the operation was ready. Jonathan arrived at the precinct early. His heart beat steadily, a rhythm he had learned to trust in moments of pressure. He had faced far more dangerous situations in his career, but this felt different. This was his city, his community. These people had trusted him. He wouldn't let them down. He approached the front doors, walking with purpose. The officers on duty barely glanced at him as he passed, and he didn't break stride. He knew they were still reeling from the public scandal involving Mason's actions the day before, and now they were vulnerable. Inside, the building was quiet, almost too quiet. The hum of fluorescent lights filled the air, and the silence was broken only by the occasional shuffle of feet. Jonathan could hear the sounds of voices filtering through the hallways. He knew Mason was nearby. He approached the office door, his hand brushing the cool metal handle. The door opened without a sound, revealing Mason seated at his desk. The younger officer looked up at Jonathan with a mixture of arrogance and confusion. Well, the man of the hour," Mason sneered, leaning back in his chair. Jonathan closed the door behind him. "You've been busy, haven't you, Mason?" Mason smirked, clearly not realizing the full gravity of the situation. "You really think you can take me down? I've got connections, real power. You're nothing but a pawn in a broken system." Jonathan's eyes narrowed. "The system isn't broken, Mason. You are. And you're about to see just how far the truth goes." Mason's smirk faltered, and for the first time a flicker of doubt crossed his face. "What are you talking about?" Jonathan stepped forward, placing a folder on Mason's desk. "You didn't think I'd find out, did you? You didn't think I'd trace the evidence back to you. But you've made a mistake, Mason. The network you've built, it ends here." Before Mason could respond, the door behind them burst open. Simmons and his team flooded the room, carrying files and evidence bags. "Get on the ground, Mason," Simmons ordered, his voice as cold as steel. Mason's eyes widened. The truth was unraveling faster than he could process. Jonathan's voice was steady as he spoke again, the weight of his position settling in. "It's over. You're done." Mason lunged, reaching for a hidden gun beneath his desk, but Jonathan was faster. He grabbed Mason's wrist, twisting it until the gun slipped from his hand. The officers moved in, securing him with cuffs. As Mason was led away, Jonathan felt a sense of satisfaction, but it was fleeting. The job wasn't done. There were still people out there, people who had helped Mason and his crew. It was time to tear down the walls completely. Back at the FBI headquarters, the team worked tirelessly through the night to process the evidence. Jonathan stood over the files, his mind still sharp, piecing together the full scope of the corruption. There was no turning back now. The storm was coming, and nothing could stop it. The storm that Jonathan had set in motion was now unstoppable. The precinct was under lockdown. With the arrest of Mason, the entire operation began to crumble. Jonathan's team had seized the evidence and secured enough proof to implicate dozens of officers in illegal activities, ranging from racketeering to covering up murders. But even as they celebrated their success, they knew this was just the beginning. The scale of corruption ran deep, deeper than any of them could have anticipated. In the conference room at FBI headquarters, Jonathan stood at the head of the table, his team gathered around him. Each face reflected the exhaustion of weeks spent tracking down the conspiracy, but they also shared a look of quiet determination. This was the final leg of the journey, the hardest part. "All right," Jonathan said, his voice steady but filled with urgency. "We've got the evidence. Now we need to get the full story out. The public needs to know what's been going on inside the police force, inside the very systems meant to protect them. We can't afford any slip-ups." Simmons, who had become Jonathan's right hand during the operation, spoke up. "I've got the media lined up for a live broadcast. We'll expose everything." Jonathan nodded. "Good. But we need to hit them where it hurts. We're not just revealing Mason's involvement, we're exposing the entire network, everyone who covered for him. And what about the higher-ups?" another agent, Daniels, asked. Jonathan's expression darkened. "They'll be exposed too, but we need to be careful. The people involved in this aren't just in the police department. Some of them have connections that go all the way up the ladder. It's not just Mason's crew we're dealing with anymore. There are people in power who won't go down without a fight." The room fell silent. Everyone knew what that meant. They weren't just fighting corrupt cops anymore. They were fighting the very system that allowed this corruption to flourish. That night, as Jonathan sat alone in his office, the weight of everything pressed on him. He thought about the moment he had walked into that precinct, when the racist officers had confronted him, how they had accused him of being an intruder on his own property, completely unaware of who he was, and now, here he was, exposing the very system that had tried to bury him, his reputation and his career. His phone buzzed. It was a text from Devon, his former commanding officer and longtime friend. "You're in deep now. Make sure your team's ready. They'll come for you." Jonathan's fingers hovered over the screen as he typed a quick reply. "I know, but we're not backing down. It's time they faced the consequences." The following day, the storm Jonathan had been building erupted. The press conference was set. Journalists, reporters, and news anchors packed into the room, the cameras flashing as Jonathan took his seat at the front. He wasn't just the FBI director anymore. He was a man with a purpose, one that extended far beyond his office. The media buzzed with anticipation. They had no idea what they were about to witness. What Jonathan was about to reveal would shake the foundations of law enforcement, exposing years of corruption that had festered unchecked. Jonathan took a deep breath and stood. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice calm but filled with the weight of truth. "Today we stand at a crossroads in our country's history. For too long, individuals in power have used their positions to exploit, harm, and control. But today that ends." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. The reporters scribbled notes, their pens racing across the paper. "I'm here to tell you the story of Mason and his corrupt network of officers. But this isn't just about one man. This is about a broken system that failed the people it was meant to protect. A system that allowed this man to abuse his power and hurt innocent lives." The room grew still. The cameras captured every word, every moment. Jonathan could feel the eyes of the nation on him. "We have gathered enough evidence to show that Mason and his partners were involved in everything from illegal surveillance to bribery and murder. We've identified over 20 officers connected to this operation, all of whom will be arrested today. This is only the beginning. We will continue to investigate the corrupt officials who have hidden behind their badges and protected each other. They will be held accountable." He looked directly into the camera, his eyes fierce. "But this is more than just an investigation. This is a call to action. The people of this country deserve better. We cannot allow this to continue. We will bring justice to the victims, and we will restore the trust that has been broken." The room erupted in applause, but Jonathan remained focused. He knew this was just the first step. He had a long fight ahead of him, but he wasn't alone. As the press conference concluded, Jonathan walked to the back of the room, his mind already planning his next steps. He needed to speak with his team. They still had work to do. "Director Blackwell," a voice called from behind him. Jonathan turned to find a reporter, a young woman with a notepad in hand. "Can I ask you one last question?" He nodded, his expression still serious. "Go ahead." The reporter hesitated, then asked, "Why now? Why expose this corruption now, when you're at the peak of your career? What changed?" Jonathan's eyes hardened. "I didn't ask for this. I didn't ask to be put in a position where I had to expose the very system I fought for. But sometimes, you don't have a choice. When you realize the truth, you have to act, and that's what I'm doing." The reporter wrote furiously in her notebook. As Jonathan walked away, he couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. He had exposed the corruption, but now, the real battle began. They didn't know it yet, but Jonathan Blackwell was just getting started. The fallout from Jonathan Blackwell's press conference was immediate. The entire nation was watching. News outlets ran his speech on loop, dissecting every word, every pause. The people who had once turned a blind eye to the corruption in law enforcement were now starting to listen. The seeds of change had been planted, and the roots were growing quickly. But there was one question that echoed in Jonathan's mind as the days passed. Was this enough? The public had reacted. The officers involved were arrested, and Mason was behind bars. But Jonathan knew the corruption didn't stop there. It never did. It was like a virus, crawling its way through every crack and crevice of the system, and if it wasn't eradicated completely, it would find a way to survive. Jonathan leaned over his desk in the FBI headquarters, the weight of the entire operation resting on his shoulders. He had promised the victims justice, but that justice was far from over. Across the country, the ripple effect continued. Police unions, national organizations, and politicians scrambled to respond. Some condemned the actions of Mason and his crew, but others tried to downplay the scale of the corruption. They called it an isolated incident, and accused Jonathan of using it to further his personal agenda. But Jonathan wasn't worried about public opinion. He had one goal: to ensure that the system changed from the inside out. The next morning, Jonathan stood in front of a new group of FBI recruits. Their faces were fresh, eager, and filled with the idealism that Jonathan had once carried when he first joined the Bureau. He needed to remind them why they were there. He needed them to understand what true justice looked like, not just in theory, but in practice. "I've spent my life fighting for what's right," Jonathan began, his voice steady, "and I've learned a few things along the way. The most important lesson is this: the truth doesn't care about your position, your power, or your title. It will always find a way to surface, and when it does, we have to be ready to act." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the recruits. What happened at Cafford State wasn't just a police scandal. It wasn't just about corrupt officers. It was a failure of the system, a system that failed the very people it was meant to protect. Jonathan looked out at the recruits, his eyes locking onto theirs. "You are the next generation of this Bureau. You are the ones who will ensure that what happened to the people of Crestwood never happens again." That night, as Jonathan sat alone in his office, his phone buzzed with a message. It was from Devon, his old commanding officer, the one person who had always had his back. "I've got something. It's bigger than you think. They're already planning a comeback. You've exposed them, but there are others, higher up. Don't stop now. There's more." Jonathan sat up straight, the room suddenly feeling smaller. His instincts kicked in. He'd known it. He'd known the fight wasn't over. The people who had protected Mason and his network weren't just criminals. They were part of a larger conspiracy. And if he didn't keep pushing, if he didn't keep exposing them, then the cycle would start again. The next few weeks were a blur of high-stakes investigations, more arrests, and intense pressure from every side. Jonathan's name had become synonymous with integrity, and yet, every day he felt the weight of the invisible forces watching him. The higher-ups, the ones who had been involved in keeping the corruption hidden, they weren't going to let this go easily. Late one night, Jonathan sat in a secure meeting room with his most trusted team members. They were huddled over encrypted laptops, sorting through classified documents. Jackson, a seasoned agent, had just uncovered something chilling. "This is it," Jackson said, pulling up a file. "We've got names, connections, people in the highest echelons of power. It's all here." Jonathan leaned over the laptop, his eyes scanning the list. His heart sank as he read the names. The corruption wasn't just in one precinct. It had infected state governments, private contractors, and even people within the FBI itself. "This goes deep," Jonathan said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We've been dealing with a system that's rotten to the core." Simmons, standing beside him, nodded. "We need to go public. We can't wait anymore. If we expose this now, we'll have a chance to destroy it." Jonathan took a deep breath. "If we expose this, they'll try to destroy us first. We're not just up against bad cops anymore. We're up against the people who've been controlling the game from the shadows." "I'm in," Simmons said. "Whatever it takes." Jonathan looked around the room at his team. These were the people he trusted, the ones who had stuck by him through thick and thin. Together, they had brought down Mason and his gang. But now, the real fight began. The following morning, Jonathan stood in front of the media again. This time, the stakes were higher. "We've uncovered a network of corruption that goes far beyond the precinct," Jonathan began, his voice strong. "We've identified individuals in positions of power, inside the government, the FBI, and the police force, who have protected these criminals. But today, we're not just here to expose the past. We're here to take action. This isn't just about fixing one precinct. This is about fixing a system that's broken, and that process starts now." As Jonathan left the press conference, he knew that what had just been set in motion couldn't be stopped. There was a storm coming. And this time, it wasn't just the officers who would fall. It was everyone who had enabled them, everyone who had turned a blind eye. The truth was out, and nothing would ever be the same again.